Pollution is a challenge in India. The impact of pollution, it is far more consequential than any impact of any tariffs that have been put on India so far.
How air pollution, water pollution and all forms of pollution are essentially going to mean greater poverty. It is going to mean less opportunity.
We think that it is only Delhi NCR problem. And reality is that there are more cities and more places. In fact, 60% of India doesn't even measure the quality of air.
So when a foreign investor will come here, is he going to come here and breathe your polluted air, drink your polluted water, and then invest the money also?
It actually brings death. Forget about shame in that sense. Death is more serious than shame.
I hope it never gets to such a drastic measure because that has other kinds of repercussions, of course.
All governments seem to say that we care and we want to offer solutions. Unfortunately, those solutions are restricted to the winter months. First step to solving a problem is admission and then course correction.
From a policy point of view and also from a civil society point of view, consistency has never been a strong game.
How do you expect FDI to come in? Do you think the world is foolish? Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket on TheFederal. The show is called AI with Sanket. No, this is not the AI as you know it. This is the AI of news, because news in India today needs not artificial but analytical intelligence. Today's subject is a subject which ought to be a topic of discussion everywhere. It is sometimes, especially when the air is really polluted, when schools are shut down for children, when offices go on hybrid mode or work from home. That is when we usually discuss this. Among the people, it does not become a huge talking point. Air pollution. But for a country which was leading a huge delegation in Davos to get in more foreign direct investment, India got a rude shock when Gita Gopinath made this statement. Let's listen in.
Pollution is a challenge in India, and if you look at the impact of pollution on the Indian economy, it is far more consequential than any impact of any tariffs that have been put on India so far. If you look at the annual cost to India's GDP of the level of pollution that you have, and it's not just the effect on economic activity, but it's also the loss in lives. I mean, the numbers are really large. Based on a World Bank study that was done, I think it was published in 22, about 1.7 million lives are lost every year in India because of pollution. That's 18% of the deaths in India.
So you heard what Gita Gopinath has to say. Our biggest problem is not the Trump tariffs. We would lose as an economy perhaps much less than what we will lose or what we are losing in our GDP to air pollution. Add to that, this will directly reflect in poor FDI inflow. Imagine who is going to come to this country armed with money, with investment, only to cut short his or her life by 10 years. Air pollution problem is severe. It is leading to death, say reports. It is leading to international shame, as illustrated by Gita Gopinath. Let's put this to a discussion now. Have we taken our air pollution problem way too lightly? And has Gita Gopinath given India its rude shock, which it needed perhaps long time ago? So joining us right now on this discussion is Vimlendu Jha, environmentalist, and Nirupama Soundararajan, economist. Thank you very much. This is an important discussion because what Gita Gopinath has been able to draw our attention to, if you would want to do that in this country, you would either get arrested or you will be charged anti-national. All sorts of things have started being to be associated with even an anti-pollution protest. But the economic cost of what is happening, what the country is losing economically as well as in terms of the death toll, is something which is alarming. And it has been said at a global investment destination. If this doesn't ring alarm bells, I don't know what will. Vimlendu Jha, we would like to begin with you first. Your opening comments on what you think of Gita Gopinath's intervention.
I think what she said is absolutely right. The fact that the focus has been brought to two very, very important things, and something that I've maintained all the time, that cost of inaction actually is higher than cost of action. If you look at the World Bank reports of the past of 2022 as well, it clearly says that the loss to GDP because of pollution is almost around 9% or more in that sense. Of course, over the last couple of years, we've seen figures from 4% to 9% in that sense of different global economic surveys and economic bodies talking about it. If you actually translate that GDP number for our audience who doesn't understand what is the value of GDP, that almost comes around 30 lakh crores. So imagine India as a country, we're actually, and this is 2022 data that we're talking about, of course, a lot has happened in the last 4 years. We are actually losing somewhere around 30 lakh crores. And imagine, therefore, that cost of inaction and cost of action conversation that I began with, that imagine if we actually had to really put only 50% of that, which is say 15 lakh crores, if we would have invested year on year on air pollution, perhaps things would be very, very different. What Gita Gopinath also was talking about is in terms of deaths. Of course, she was referring to World Bank, but actually it's the Lancet report, which talks about 1.5 million or perhaps 17 lakh people dying every year because of air pollution. And of course, almost 18% of Indians die because of air pollution. Of course, the death certificate doesn't mention that death because of air pollution. So it's it's very, very important.
Mr. Vimlendu, just to get a clarity, this Lancet or World Bank report that she is talking about is 17 lakh deaths only and only to air pollution and no other form of pollution.
Nothing at all. It is all because of air pollution that we're talking about, and only in India. Of course, Lancet also breaks it down for Delhi NCR. Of course, Lancet also talks about air pollution deaths, or even for that matter, World Bank talks about air pollution impact on overall global economy. So there are studies that talks about 8 to 9% overall impact of pollution on global economy, and specifically in terms of India, around 9.5 to 9.7% in that sense. And also Lancet talks about the number of deaths globally and in India, 17 lakh people dying each year because of air pollution. And by the way, this number doesn't talk about morbidity. What Gita Gopinath was also talking about, something in that breath, very interesting, that imagine if you're actually trying to be a global destination for economic progress in terms of being the third largest nation, or perhaps whatever, 5 trillion or 20 trillion. Of course, 5 trillion economy is what she was referring to. And that's something which is very, very achievable. So she was actually celebrating, congratulating the dispensation that we'll be able to achieve that. But what sort of an achievement that would it be that you become the third largest economy of the world, and quickly enough in 3 years, but a sick nation with 18% to 20% people dying only because of air pollution? We're not adding water. We're not talking misgovernance. We're not talking about a situation like Indore or Himachal or other forms of death because of vagaries of governance in that sense. We're only talking about misgovernance in terms of mis-air or bad air causing this kind of economic loss and loss to life.
Nirupama Soundararajan, you see, this ought to be alarming. It should have been alarming for us. Corrective measures should have been taken, and not the stopgap arrangements that we are used to. Do you feel that the cost of government inaction is one part, which Vimlendu is referring to? The cost of us having normalized pollution, air pollution, water pollution, crisis, we have normalized everything. We as citizens have normalized or learned to live with all these problems. Do you think that there is an inherent economic cost to all of this? Just break down the economics for us.
There is certainly an economic cost, and a very high one. I think what Gita Gopinath said is not new. I think even way back in 2019, similar figures were quoted by various studies, including Government of India collaborated studies with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Your Clean Air Fund, funded studies, where similar figures have always come out, where it's about 1.7 to 1.8 million deaths that are happening purely because of air pollution alone. And I think, the result of such studies was the institution of the National Clean Air Program, which started NCAP, which actually aimed at reducing your particulate matter, both PM10 and PM2.5, by I think about 35% by 2024, and now they've increased it to 40% by 2026. And if you look at any of the impact studies that have happened, they will tell you it is at best tepid and it's very, very varied. So, which means there are two issues here that we have, that while there is some kind of cognizance of the problem, and which is why you have these policies, and I'm not getting into how effective they are right now, but there are policies that aim at hopefully making structural shifts possible or underplay. But where we lack completely is, I think, also what comes in here, because this is not something that only the government can do by itself. There is also a certain participation that is required from civil society. And somewhere this entire how do I say, getting used to pollution, living with it is one side of it, but that still just does not justify a lack of concerted action. So I will not say no action, because I don't think that is entirely right. But I think whatever action has taken place is not enough, clearly, and it's not well coordinated, and it clearly is not well implemented, which in the grander picture tantamounts to almost no action. So you could kind of look at it that way, but there have been policy changes. The other aspect that I do want to come in, bring in here, is the lag period. See, any policy between the time that it's implemented and when impact is felt can vary. Now, what we know is during COVID, when we had the lockdown period, you saw that in about 7-8 days, when everything pretty much shut down, everything improved. Which means, as everyone with nothing happening, everything shut down, we saw remarkable improvement in as short a period as maybe a week. Now, clearly, that's not something that we are in a position to do, though I remember many people during that time advocating for 1 week of complete lockdown, 2 weeks of complete lockdown, except for essential services, as a way to combat pollution. And I hope it never gets to such a drastic measure, because that has other kinds of repercussions, of course. But the fact being that otherwise, when business as usual continues and you have policies that are attempting to be implemented in whatever haphazard manner that it is now, clearly also because pollution is something that kind of supersedes jurisdictions. Because in India, it's not just, we have a federal system of central, state, and urban local bodies, but pollution is something which is everywhere. So you have what are known as airshed policies that are being developed, but not yet actually finessed. So with all of this as a problem, you see extended lag periods. And for lag periods to shorten, you need consistency, which as a country we lack. Either from a policy point of view and also from a civil society point of view, consistency has never been a strong game. And I think that has had a very, very deep impact in terms of realizing any potentials, even as micro as possible, of any policy, interventions that have taken place.
I'm going to come, Vimalendra, just one moment. I'm going to come back to Ms. Saundarya Rajan on essentially some numbers which Indians ought to understand. How air pollution, water pollution, and all forms of pollution are essentially going to mean greater poverty. It is going to mean less opportunity and all those things. I'll come to you in just a short moment. We'll elaborate on this also. Vimalendra, see, the question here is this. All governments, all of them, and since you and I have spoken enough about the national capital, all governments seem to say that we care and we want to offer solutions. Unfortunately, those solutions are restricted to the winter months, whether it is Yamuna cleaning or whether it is air pollution. And most of those solutions are extremely stopgap, extremely ad hoc and temporary. Nothing is permanent. Assuming that we have been able to begin some long-term changes, assuming that we have begun, do you think even the course correction could take many, many years before you see anything changing on the ground? And all of this will translate into investment, lack of investment.
Absolutely, Sanket. So something that I've been saying, that there are three main issues that we actually have with pollution governance regime in our country, specifically with regard to air right now. That we actually talk about air pollution only October to January, and we think it's an episodic problem. Reality is that it's a perennial problem. It's a 365 days problem. That's one. And that's a disservice that we're doing to overall understanding of air pollution or pollution governance in that sense. The second is that we think that it is only Delhi NCR problem. And reality is that there are more cities and more places. In fact, 60% of India doesn't even measure the quality of air that it breathes in that sense. The entire monitoring regime is restricted to only certain capitals in that sense, and therefore it's a pan-India problem. And the third, what you mentioned, that whatever solution that we come up with, I completely disagree with what Nirupama was actually talking about, that government is trying to do something and there's something called policy in terms of National Clean Air Program. Imagine two parts of it. For government, if she's saying that in 2019 government actually agreed to these 1.6 million deaths, reality is that just last month the minister, actually floor of the house, actually said that no one in India dies because of air pollution. In fact, no one even falls ill because of air pollution. So therefore, I'm not sure which data point is Niru actually talking about with regard to whether the government accepts because for the last 5 years, we've seen government not even accepting that anyone dies and anyone falls ill because of air pollution. Floor of the parliament has happened. The other is that when we think of political intent and actual policy, if we think that the government is doing something, the only measurement of that is amount of money that you actually allocate for that. If you look at so-called National Clean Air Program that Nirupama was actually talking about, the budget allocation for National Clean Air Program for 6 years for 120 or 130 odd cities was 19,711 crores, which comes to around around 300 crores a year for almost 130 cities, which comes to less than 25 crores a year. So, which is completely not adequate. So at the end of the day, I will only be able to, think that our environment minister or prime minister or respected states are serious about this air pollution problem and understands these data points, both in terms of the impact on economy of perhaps 9% impact on GDP or 1.8 million deaths as per Lancet, or many other studies that we're talking about, will only be if you put money on the table. So if you actually do not put money on the table, if you only allocate peanuts, and in fact, my last RTI that I'd filed and that the report that came 15 days ago with regard to Delhi NCR, it talks about how only 81 crores was actually allocated over 5 years. And out of that 81 crores, only 17% or less than 17% was actually spent. Imagine you only allocate 81 crores for 5 years, you only spend 17% of it, and 90% of that 17% spent money was actually spent in this sprinkling of water. So therefore, I, as not as an environmentalist, but just as a citizen who also breathes the same air, perhaps I breathe slightly better air than people in Sangam Vihar, or many of us have the privilege of slightly better air than people who are poorer in that sense. From that point of view, I think I seriously question the actual intent of the government and of our governments in that sense. And also reality is that, all this pollution season, year after year, earlier we were actually bashing Arvind Kejriwal. This year we're bashing Rekha Gupta. I'm sure you are in Noida. I live in Gurgaon. No one even asked those questions of our respective, chief ministers of the other states. And reality is that if it's a pan-India problem, if it's a regional problem, if it's a national GDP problem, then should it not actually happen at the central level? So, sorry for the long answer, but short answer to your question that if we actually get onto the track, we need to solve this problem for sure, and not because it actually brings in disproportionate shame in Davos or otherwise. It actually brings death. Forget about shame in that sense. Death is more serious than shame or perception in that sense. We will have to get on that track. The fact that we've actually earned this medal of being the most polluted country of the world and have caused so many deaths over several decades, and this is not only Modi Sarkar in that sense. You're talking about air pollution conversation has been going on since late 90s, and we know about NC Mehta case in so India's air has not been polluted because of a particular political party in that sense. It's the design problem, and therefore it has to have a design solution. It's a system problem, systemic problem, and therefore it will have to have a systemic solution and long term. As you said, कि हमें सर्जरी चाहिए, हम बैंडेड ढूंढ लगा के चले जाते हैं. ये ग्रैप क्या है? What is this grab? I think the only thing that happens is grab in the name of governance, and that needs to somewhere stop is what I feel. And that's where I think I'm really seriously looking forward to the budget session.
Are you suggesting, Vimlendu, that we are not even close to, let me quickly take that to Nirupama Soundararajan. Ms. Soundararajan, first step to solving a problem is admission and then course correction. So the problem at the very first level is admission. I don't think there is admission on the part of our response, collective collective political response, administrative response, that this is a huge problem. And then when we go to Davos and lead perhaps our biggest ever delegation of, some say, 4,000 odd people, we call it the Davos picnic, frankly. I don't know what is the point of having such a huge delegation going there. While you breathe the amazing air at 3 AQI or 10 AQI or whatever, and you want FDI to come in, Gita Gopinath's argument is very simple. How do you expect FDI to come in? Do you think the world is foolish? They don't realize what is wrong with this country? So when a foreign investor will come here, is he going to come here and breathe your polluted air, drink your polluted water, and then invest the money also? While you are trying to sell him this dream of this being a lovely FDI destination, the world is seeing the problem. And that problem is pollution, which we are not even choosing to acknowledge.
Okay, so see, there are three things. One, first, to kind of just clarify on what Vimalendu said. I'm not commenting on whether the government has accepted, not accepted. There are reports from government institutions, especially your National Health Institute, except in the National Institute of Health. They have reports that have come out, which are all government funded, etc., where similar figures have been quoted. That was the limited point that I was making then since 2019. And for your reference, you can look up those, which is there. This is one that is done by them and funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Clean Air Fund, I think. That's the one that is there. And there is a report on that, which quotes exactly the same figures, very similar to the World Bank report of 2022. Coming to the other point, see, I don't think today the debate really is in terms of whether we're doing much or not. I think the answer is very clear that we're not. And I'm not here to debate or even justify that or try and justify that are we doing enough. I don't think that's the question. If you're looking at absolutes, and I get from where Vimalendu is coming, whether what we are doing in whatever limited manner amounts to doing anything at all or not is a fair conversation and a question that we should be asking. But the point of the matter in both cases, if you're looking at, is clearly we are not doing enough. Are we taking it seriously enough? Is our action planned? No. It is not. And I don't disagree at all with what you're saying or what Vimalendu is saying. When it comes to the FDI question, right, it's very interesting. The fact of the matter is that she has a very valid point, Gita Gopinath, when she says that tomorrow when FDI comes into the country, will they bring in investments, right? Looking at where we are, will people come here, settle down, do business here? Clearly, that will never happen if this is how we're going to go, because if there is no action or very bad action, rather than saying no action, I choose to go with very bad or very inept action in that sense, because I cannot say in good conscience that we're not doing anything. There have been very isolated, sporadic things. But again, to Vimalendu's point, where I agree with him completely, this cannot be episodic, which is where...
No, Miss Saundarya Rajan, what have we done? You tell me what, from a government point of view, if attracting investment is all that it matters, just hear me out. If attracting investment is all that matters, we have signed X amount of MOU here, MOU. First of all, MOU does not mean investment on the ground. It is a memorandum of understanding. There is many a slip between the cup and the lip. Having said that, suppose if a foreign investor comes into the country, do you think he'll be thoroughly impressed with water sprinklers to handle pollution? I mean, is this the solution?
No, I'm sorry. You misunderstand. You're mixing two things here. The FDI conversation is separate, and what the government has done in terms of battling pollution is another. I was referring to the former rather than the latter. So if you're looking at, so let's come back to the FDI question, which is what we were talking of. Look, with FDI, the fact is it's very easy to look at it in terms of data. There are many factors that affect FDI. Right? Inflow, and as you say, MOU is just an understanding. There is a big difference between saying I am willing to invest and actually investing. Now, when there is pollution on ground, will people actually come and set up ground? Not really. Obviously not. But the flip side of the argument also is very interesting, and one to consider is what are the sectors that you're actually trying to attract investments in. It's largely in where there is, it's industries. I would rather we focus on getting investments which actually deal with clean technology, which looks at all of that, where you have people looking to find solutions. That is not happening. For various reasons. Part of the conversation of the Gita Gopinath thing was also on ease of doing business, and all of that adds up. So even if you want people with clean technology wanting to come in, if they at all want to come in, there are other things that have to be made easy. Second part is, if you're looking at investments coming in anywhere else, is there a correlation between the two? I did, after, I went through to see what kind of correlation exists. I think there will be long-term correlation, but currently with data that has been coming in, as of now, I don't see any immediate impact of pollution affecting FDI flows. Immediate impact. This is not to say that there cannot be an impact, there won't be an impact, or that in the long term it is something that that will play a more prominent deciding factor. But as of now, if there are any reasons for slowdown in FDI, right? And I don't think they have any direct attributions academically. Again, forget what is being said politically, what is being said as part of your general discussions is different. Academically, I don't think there have been any studies as yet. That can also be because nobody's looked at it in greater detail. And probably this is a variable that needs to start being examined more. But
No, ma'am, I agree. But see, ma'am, I agree with what you are saying. However, I feel that while academically no study has been done, which, I mean, there is a World Bank report, there's a Lancet report. I don't know whether they will qualify as academic exercise or not. I think they should. So academically, you have proof that there is a problem. Whether it will directly impact FDI or not, do we want CEOs, global CEOs and business honchos to come and tell the Prime Minister or come and tell the government? We will not come because of pollution.
Absolutely, Sanket. So I think what Gita Gopinath, just one point, Niru.
Just make my point.
Yeah, sure.
With Lancet report and the World Bank report have talked about many things, but in terms of its impact on FDI coming in is not something that has actually been studied in detail. That is my limited point. I'm not saying they're all academic reports. There is a proper methodology. So I'm not discrediting any of the other data points that's coming in. I am only saying that the impact on FDI, which Gita Gopinath mentioned today, is a variable that should be considered. But
I think she mentioned, I get your point. Nirupamaji, I get your point, but Vimlendu, Gita Gopinath also mentioned the cost to GDP. Now that is also a parameter of your economic success. And that is very huge.
Absolutely. So two things, Sanket. Exactly what I started my conversation with. She was actually talking about the impact to GDP, which is almost 9% as per World Bank report, and which comes to 30 lakh crores per year. But more than that, what Gita Gopinath actually was referring to is something that we've seen this season, several news stories with regard to more than half a dozen CXOs who have actually left Delhi, escaped Delhi, or actually abandoned Delhi because of air pollution issues. We've seen Cars 24 CEO talk about it. We've seen Xiaomi ex-CEO talk about it. We've seen that the famous podcast was abandoned in between because of air pollution. So I think what Gita Gopinath is also talking about is that why would people want to invest? Which great professional would want to come and settle in India and set up business here? And that's what she was also referring to. Indeed, she was talking about debt, she was talking about GDP, but she was also talking about private health of so-called accomplished individuals and CEOs being affected very, very soon. So you might just become a 5 trillion economy or the third largest economy, and very, very quickly, perhaps in 2 to 3 years is what she was talking
with your
about.
CEO in the hospital for an asthma attack.
And that's what has actually happened. If you ask people have stopped, are not taking postings here. You go and speak to the diplomats here. Most of the diplomats, most of the offices here are in some sort of a high security posting. It's a high risk posting. Earlier, high risk postings were war zones, and bad air pollution zones are also become high risk postings for many of these embassies in that sense. And that's been going on for 3-4 years in that sense. So therefore, we need to understand that prioritizing health. And imagine, University of Chicago report clearly says, and these are all peer-reviewed reports, that anyone who lives in Delhi will lose 8 to 10 years of their life. So then any CXO or CEO from any other so-called FDI investment private equity fund or from wherever would not like to be stationed here in Delhi NCR losing 10 years of their life, although they would be earning $10 billion per year in that sense from a profitability point of view. So these are connected issues. The World Bank report with regard to GDP And the Lancet report in terms of death that we're talking about, University of Chicago report in terms of life expectancy that we're talking about, or these anecdotes and stories and primetime stories on business news channels with regard to how people are fleeing. Fleeing is a gas chamber word equivalent in that sense, fleeing Delhi because they can afford to perhaps not take a job or perhaps rather live in Zurich than live in Noida and Gurgaon and breathe this terrible toxic air.
I think this sums it up beautifully. I wish our air was as clean, as beautiful as this conversation was in terms of clarity. I wish the air was also clear. We were just joking at the beginning of this broadcast. I wish this was not a joke. It is raining in the national capital today, in Gurugram, in Noida, everywhere. So I very, very gleefully opened the AQI app, thinking that the rain will bring down the AQI levels in the national capital. It is still at 300. Imagine how stubborn this problem is. Imagine how severe this problem is, that even rain cannot wish it away.
And imagine cloud seeding couldn't have brought in this much rain. And in so-called work, investment, and political will, imagine the theater, the spectacle that went in this season to solving the air problem was this cloud seeding measure, where cloud seeding was successful, but there was no rain. As an operation successful, patient dead.
Correct. But again, to begin with, the first thing that needs to be done is to admit there is a problem. A decade plus on, we are far from that admission also. And this is the sad part. We can lead as big a delegation as we want to Davos, but Gita Gopinath said it how it is supposed to be said. Our big problem is pollution, not so much the Trump tariffs. Thank you very much, Nirupama Soundararajan as well as Vimlendu Jha for joining us. Thank you very much.